The scar runs from his left ear to his jawline, 3 jagged lines carved deep into flesh, a permanent reminder of a moment when pride cost more than money. In the smoky back rooms of Chicago, in the speakeasies where jazz bleeds through walls and whiskey flows despite federal law, they call him Scarface, though never to his face. Those who make that mistake don't make it twice. The year is 1925, and Alphonse Capone controls an empire worth $100 million, a sum so vast it equals the budget of small nations. He sits in the Lexington Hotel, 7th floor, suite number 209, surrounded by men with Tommy guns and loyalty bought in cash and sealed in blood. Outside, the city bleeds. Rival gangs fight over corners, over neighborhoods, over the right to sell beer to thirsty Americans who never wanted prohibition in the first place. Inside, Capone eats pasta his mother made that morning, reads the evening paper with reading glasses perched on his wide nose, and plans tomorrow's deliveries with the precision of a corporate executive. Beer, whiskey, women, protection, gambling. Chicago runs on his schedule now. The mayor takes his calls. The police wear his payroll like a second uniform, badges that shine with bribe money. City Hall operates on his approval. Judges rule in his favor. Reporters quote him like a statesman. But in the mansion's mirror late at night when the lights go dim and the bodyguards stand outside, he touches the scar and remembers the night a small-time thug named Frank Galluccio slashed him 3 times for insulting his sister in a Coney Island dance hall. The flesh healed wrong, puckered and raised, the nickname stuck like a brand. And somewhere in his blood, invisible and patient as death itself, a different enemy waits, a spiral-shaped bacterium that will destroy him more completely than any rival ever could. Prohibition turned criminals into businessmen, and businessmen into criminals, creating an entire economy built on constitutional hypocrisy. The 18th Amendment banned the manufacture, sale, and transportation of alcohol in 1920, but it couldn't ban human nature, couldn't legislate away thirst or the desire to forget. The law created opportunity, and Capone saw it before most. He started as muscle for Johnny Torrio, collecting debts and breaking faces in the Italian neighborhoods of Brooklyn, learning that violence was just another business tool, like accounting or advertising. When Torrio moved to Chicago to expand operations, Capone followed, a 20-year-old kid with ambition that burned hotter than caution. The city was a war zone, carved into bloody territories by Irish gangs, Italian crews, Polish syndicates, all fighting for the same illegal dollar. Torrio taught him the mathematics of violence, the cold equations that separated successful gangsters from dead ones. You don't kill everyone. You kill enough to make a point, to send a message that echoes through the underworld. Then you negotiate. You buy judges before you buy bullets, because judges last longer and cost less. You smile at the press and hand out turkeys at Thanksgiving, toys at Christmas, soup to the unemployed during the Depression. The public loves a generous gangster, a Robin Hood in a fedora. If you're curious how Capone built his empire from nothing, stick around, because the strategy he used still shows up in organized crime today. By 1925, Torrio retired after nearly dying in an ambush, bullets tearing through his jaw and chest, and Capone inherited an organization that moved 7,000 gallons of beer every single day, operated over 10,000 speakeasies, and employed more people than most legitimate corporations. He had truck drivers, brewers, coopers, accountants, enforcers, bagmen, lawyers, doctors, tailors, all on the payroll. He owned speakeasies, brothels, gambling dens, racetracks, and half the politicians in Cook County. When reporters asked about his business, he shrugged and smiled, the picture of wounded innocence. Thoughtfully, "People want beer," he said. "I give them beer. I give them what they want. What's wrong with that? I'm a businessman, same as anyone else. But empires built on violence collapse the same way. Foundations of blood turning to quicksand. Capone's rise meant bodies, lots of bodies, rivals eliminated with ruthless efficiency. The bootlegging business was competitive, territorial, zero-sum. Every barrel you sold was a barrel your competitor didn't. Rival gangs didn't surrender territory peacefully. They fought for it with guns and bombs and ambushes. The North Side Gang, led by George Bugs Moran, an Irishman who hated Capone with personal intensity, refused to bend or negotiate. They hijacked Capone's beer trucks on lonely roads, killed his drivers and left them in ditches, bombed his breweries in the middle of the night, ambushed his collectors. Capone tolerated competition poorly. He believed in overwhelming force, in responses so disproportionate they became legend. in making examples that echoed through the underworld for years and kept others from even thinking about betrayal. His enforcers carried Thompson submachine guns, weapons designed for trench warfare and repurposed for Chicago's streets, turning urban corners into battlefields. The guns could fire 800 rounds per minute, turning cars into colanders and men into meat and memory. Capone's favorite enforcer, Jack McGurn, a former boxer with dead eyes and steady hands, coordinated the violence with military precision, planning hits like invasions. They called him Machine Gun Jack. He didn't smile when he worked. He didn't talk unnecessarily. He just executed orders with professional detachment. On the cold morning of February 14, 1929, a day that would become infamous, 7 men gather in a garage on North Clark Street, their breath steaming in the freezing air. They're waiting for a whiskey shipment hijacked from Detroit, stomping their feet against the freeze, blowing into their hands, complaining about the cold and the weight. They work for Bugs Moran, though Moran himself is running late, delayed by traffic that will save his life. Outside, a black Cadillac pulls up to the curb, engine idling. Men in police uniforms step out, walking with the authority of law enforcement. The 7 inside the garage assume it's a routine shakedown, another bribe to pay, another delay in the day's business. They face the wall without alarm, hands up, annoyed, but not afraid. Police raids are part of the cost of doing business. Piers Muir, then the Tommy guns open fire, and the world turns to thunder and screaming metal. The sound is inhuman, mechanical, a tearing shriek that rips through brick and bone and the cold morning air. 70 rounds in less than 10 seconds, bullets punching through wool coats and flesh and internal organs, ricocheting off limestone walls. The men collapse in layers, bodies jerking and folding like puppets with cut strings, blood spraying the wall in dark arterial arcs that drip toward the oil-stained floor. One man, Frank Gusenberg, takes 14 bullets to the torso, but somehow stays conscious, his body refusing to accept death immediately. When real police arrive minutes later, summoned by neighbors who heard the gunfire and thought it was a car backfiring, they find him drowning in his own blood, trying to crawl toward the door with intestines hanging from his shredded abdomen. They kneel beside him, ask the standard question, "Who shot you? Who did this?" Softly. "Nobody shot me," he whispers through bloody teeth, following the code even as his lungs fill with fluid. Then he dies, the last victim of the St. Valentine's Day massacre. The massacre makes front-page news across America. Photos of the bodies lined up like broken mannequins, shocking a public that had romanticized gangsters as roguish anti-heroes, charming rebels against an unpopular law. This wasn't business. This was butchery, industrial-scale slaughter in civilian clothes. Yes. Capone, conveniently vacationing in Florida when it happened, his alibi airtight and documented, denies involvement with wounded indignation. The press doesn't believe him. The public doesn't believe him. More importantly, the federal government stops pretending this is a local problem that local police can handle. President Herbert Hoover, furious and embarrassed that gangsters operate with more efficiency than his own government, summons his advisors to the White House. Firmly, "I want that man in jail," he says, jabbing his finger at Capone's photo in the newspaper. "I don't care how you do it. Get it done." To the Bureau of Prohibition assigns Elliot Ness, a 26-year-old agent with a college degree in economics and an uncorruptible reputation, to destroy Capone's breweries and supply lines. Ness and his hand-picked team of 9 men, later called the Untouchables because they refuse bribes in a city where everyone has a price, raid warehouses and smash barrels with axes, costing Capone thousands of dollars per raid. They make headlines. They make Capone angry. But they don't make arrests that stick. You can't arrest a man for broken bottles and spilled beer. You need evidence of personal involvement, and Capone is insulated by layers of subordinates who take the fall. Then the government changes strategy entirely, attacking from an unexpected angle. If they can't prove murder, if witnesses disappear and juries get bought and evidence goes missing, they'll prove something simpler: math. The Internal Revenue Service assigns investigator Frank Wilson, a meticulous accountant with the personality of a librarian and the tenacity of a bulldog, to follow the money. Wilson is patient, methodical, boring in the best possible way for an investigator. He spends months in basement archives reading ledgers by candlelight, tracking cash flows through shell companies, comparing lifestyle to reported income. Capone claims he's a second-hand furniture dealer, earning modest profits. a simple businessman trying to make an honest living. But he owns custom-tailored suits that cost $5,000 each, more than most men earn in a year. He tips hotel waiters $100 for bringing a glass of water. He bought his Miami estate, a sprawling mansion on Palm Island, for $40,000 in cash, bills counted out on a table. Wilson finds a ledger, buried in a seized gambling house, water-damaged but legible, that lists Capone's income from one operation alone at over $100,000 in a single year. No taxes paid, no returns filed, no accountant consulted. The case builds slowly, one receipt at a time, one witness at a time, constructing a financial portrait of massive, unreported income. Capone doesn't see it coming because he's used to violence, to threats, to bribes slipped in envelopes, to power that speaks louder than law. He doesn't fear accountants with pencils and patience. In October 1931, he walks into a Chicago courtroom expecting another bought verdict, another greased palm, another walk to freedom with photographers snapping his confident smile. Judge James Wilkerson, informed of jury tampering the night before, switches juries at the last second with another trial down the hall, swapping 12 bought men for 12 honest strangers. Capone's face goes pale, the blood draining like someone opened a valve. His lawyers scramble, requesting delays, objections, anything to stop the momentum. The trial lasts 11 days. The evidence is boring, devastating, irrefutable. Ledgers, receipts, bank statements, expenditures. Numbers don't lie, don't forget, don't accept bribes. On October 17, 1931, the jury convicts him on 5 counts of tax evasion. Judge Wilkerson, immune to threats and pleas, sentences him to 11 years in federal prison, the longest sentence ever given for tax crimes up to that point. Al Capone, the man who ordered dozens of murders, who controlled a city through fear and money, goes to prison for not paying his taxes. The irony is so thick you could cut it with a knife. He enters Atlanta Federal Penitentiary in May 1932, prison number 4085, still confident, still connected to the outside world. He bribes guards with cash smuggled in by visitors, gets a private cell with a rug and a desk, receives guests like a mayor in temporary exile, conducting business through coded messages and trusted intermediaries. The warden tolerates it because Capone brings no trouble, follows the basic rules, keeps the other inmates calm. But Washington notices, and Washington doesn't approve. The Justice Department wants him broken, humiliated, stripped of power and dignity, not living comfortably on the taxpayer's dime. In August 1934, they transfer him without warning to a new prison, built on a rock in the middle of San Francisco Bay, a fortress designed to crush the spirit. Alcatraz. The name alone terrifies inmates, whispered like a curse. The prison holds 260 men, the worst of the worst, the irredeemable and the dangerous, in cells 5 feet by 9 feet, barely larger than coffins. No newspapers allowed, no radios, no contact with the outside world beyond 1 censored letter per month and 1 brief visit every 90 days. The guards are trained to see inmates as numbers, not names, to treat everyone with equal coldness regardless of their past. Capone becomes AZ-85, his identity reduced to 2 letters and a number stenciled on his uniform. The rock is cold, always cold, wrapped in fog that swallows sound and light, making the world feel smaller and more isolated. If you want to understand how Alcatraz broke men, keep watching, because what happened to Capone there changed him more than any bullet could. The cells are concrete and steel, designed by architects who studied human breaking points, who understood that isolation destroys faster than violence. Capone, once surrounded by luxury and crowds and constant noise, now sleeps on a thin mattress that smells of mildew, eats watery soup ladled by men who don't care who he was, and works 8 hours a day in the laundry facility or mopping floors until they shine. He tries to buy favor, slipping guards folded bills during yard time. It doesn't work. The guards are federal employees, carefully vetted, paid well enough to resist temptation and monitored constantly. They report bribe attempts. Capone gets written up, loses privileges, spends time in the hole, a lightless cell where silence becomes a physical presence. The inmates know his reputation but don't care. In Alcatraz, your past means nothing. Only your present matters, and your present is a number and a mop and a shrinking world. The isolation gnaws at him slowly, relentlessly, like water wearing stone. He's used to noise, to crowds, to phones ringing and people asking questions and problems that need solving. Here silence dominates everything. The only sounds are footsteps echoing in empty corridors, waves crashing against stone foundations, and the occasional scream from someone losing their mind in solitary confinement. Capone starts writing letters to his wife May, pages and pages of rambling sentences, repetitive and increasingly incoherent. He mentions headaches, constant and crushing, pain that throbs behind his eyes and makes it hard to think. He forgets words mid-sentence, trails off into confusion, starts thoughts he can't finish. His handwriting, once neat and confident, becomes shaky, childlike, letters wobbling across the page like a drunk's path home. The prison doctor examines him during a routine check and finds something the world didn't know: syphilis. Capone contracted it decades earlier, likely in his early 20s, from a Brooklyn brothel where diseases spread as easily as gossip. He never treated it properly, maybe didn't know he had it, maybe thought it went away on its own. It didn't. The bacteria, Treponema pallidum, a corkscrew-shaped microorganism invisible to the naked eye, spread silently through his body, hiding in organs and tissues, waiting in his bloodstream like a ticking bomb. Now, after 15 years of patient destruction, it reaches his brain, crossing the blood-brain barrier and beginning its final terrible work: neurosyphilis. The disease eats neural pathways like acid, destroys memory centers, erodes personality, turns coherent thought into random static. There's no cure in 1937. Penicillin exists in laboratories, but won't become widely available for another decade. Too late to save him. Capone's mind begins to collapse while his body stays relatively strong, a cruel joke of biology. He talks to people who aren't there, holding conversations with ghosts and memories. He insists he's still running Chicago from his cell, giving orders to subordinates who died years ago. Guards find him crying in the corner of his cell, confused and frightened, asking for his mother who passed away before he entered prison. Inmates avoid him in the cafeteria and the yard, disturbed by his vacant stare and muttered nonsense. He's not Scarface anymore. He's not the king of Chicago. He's just a sick old man at 40, muttering to shadows and flinching at sounds no one else hears. The warden, James Johnston, a rigid disciplinarian who ran Folsom and San Quentin before Alcatraz, watches the decline with clinical detachment, documenting the progression in monthly reports. Capone's presence brought Alcatraz publicity, made it famous as the place that held America's most notorious criminal, but now he's a liability, a medical problem that raises uncomfortable questions. Journalists ask in their articles whether he's faking, whether this is an elaborate act to win early release. Is this punishment too cruel for a tax evader? Is the government torturing a sick man? The Bureau of Prisons doesn't care about public opinion or medical ethics. Capone serves his time, mind intact or not, until the calendar says he's done. By 1939, he can barely dress himself without help, fumbling with buttons like a toddler learning motor skills. He spends days staring at walls, seeing patterns that aren't there, occasionally strumming a banjo in the prison band, playing the same 3 simple chords over and over, lost in fog thicker than the weather surrounding the island. His fellow band members tolerate him out of pity, simplifying arrangements so he can follow along. Music is one of the few things that still reaches him, melodies cutting through the confusion for brief moments of clarity. On January 6, 1939, after serving 6.5 years of his 11-year sentence, Capone is released early for good behavior. Good behavior. The irony escapes no one who knows the truth. He's not rehabilitated, he's destroyed. He's transferred to Terminal Island Prison in California to finish the remainder of his sentence under medical supervision, then finally released on November 16, 1939, a free man in the legal sense only. He's 40 years old but looks 60, shuffling and confused. His empire is gone, scattered among successors and rivals who divided the territories and moved on. His mind is shattered, trapped in loops of memory and hallucination, unable to distinguish past from present. May picks him up at the prison gate in a borrowed car, driving him to their mansion in Palm Island, Florida. A house bought with bootlegging money, now a comfortable cage. Neighbors peek through curtains, curious and afraid, whispering to each other about the infamous gangster living among them. But the man who steps out of the car, helped by his wife and a doctor, isn't the Scarface of legend. He shuffles slowly, uncertain on his feet, needs help with stairs, stares at the ocean without recognition or interest. The spark is gone. The intelligence that built an empire has been eaten from the inside. The final years are slow erasure, a gradual fading into confusion and dependence. Capone's personal doctor, Kenneth Phillips, treats him with experimental therapies that sound more like torture than medicine, injecting him with malaria parasites to spike fevers high enough to kill the syphilis bacteria through heat. It's medieval in concept, desperate and brutal, based on the theory that high temperatures might sterilize the infection. Capone survives the fevers, shaking and sweating through 105-degree temperatures, but the damage to his brain is permanent and irreversible. His neural tissue is destroyed, Swiss cheese full of holes where memories and cognitive functions used to live. He forgets names, can't recognize faces of people he's known for decades, loses track of time and place. Sometimes he thinks he's back in Chicago during the glory years, barking orders to men who aren't there, planning raids on rival breweries that closed a decade ago. Other times he regresses further, becoming a child again, speaking in the broken Italian of his immigrant parents, asking for his mother in a trembling voice. May cares for him with exhausted devotion, wiping drool from his chin, changing soiled sheets, holding his gnarled hand when he screams at hallucinations only he can see. She bathes him, feeds him, keeps him comfortable and clean. Visitors are rare and increasingly unwelcome. The mob has moved on to new bosses and new rackets. The government has moved on to new enemies and new wars. Only family remains, and even they struggle to reconcile this drooling ghost with the man who once owned a city, who made mayors nervous and judges compliant. His children visit out of duty, sitting uncomfortably in the tropical heat, trying to make conversation with a man who doesn't always remember who they are. On January 21st, 1947, after years of slow decline, Capone suffers a massive stroke, his brain hemorrhaging in multiple locations. He collapses in the bathroom, falling hard on the tile floor. May finds him unconscious, still breathing but unresponsive. He lingers for 3 days in a coma, breathing in ragged gasps, his body finally giving up the fight his mind lost years ago. Softly, on January 28, 1947, at 7:25 in the evening, with May holding his hand and a priest murmuring prayers, his heart stops beating. He's 48 years old. The newspapers run the story on page 3, below the weather forecast and above the classifieds, a few paragraphs summarizing a life that once dominated headlines. The king is dead, but no one cares anymore. He's been irrelevant for years, a ghost haunting his own mansion. The legacy is complicated, layered in myth and truth, impossible to summarize in simple terms of good or evil. Capone's reign lasted barely a decade, from his rise in the early 20s to his conviction in 31, but it changed America in ways that still echo. He proved that organized crime could operate like a corporation, with hierarchies, divisions, territories, and quarterly profits measured in millions. He showed how corruption could devour institutions from the inside, turning protectors into collaborators, making law enforcement part of the criminal ecosystem. The FBI expanded its powers and jurisdiction because of men like Capone. Tax law was weaponized as a tool against criminals who were otherwise untouchable. Alcatraz was built, in part, to hold men like him, men whose influence reached beyond prison walls, but he also became a symbol of the American dream's dark mirror, a twisted reflection of immigrant ambition, an Italian kid from Brooklyn, son of a barber, who climbed to unimaginable power through violence and cunning, who believed sincerely that he was providing a service people wanted, who genuinely thought the public loved him for defying an unpopular law. And maybe they did for a while, during the roaring 20s when prosperity seemed endless and rules felt arbitrary, until the bodies piled too high to ignore and the violence spilled into Valentine's Day massacres. The scar on his face became iconography, visual shorthand reproduced in films and documentaries and comic books, a symbol of danger and tragedy and the price of ambition. Actors have played him dozens of times, each adding layers of fiction to the reality, making him taller or shorter, smarter or dumber, more sympathetic or more monstrous than he actually was. The real Capone was smarter than most movies suggest, a strategic thinker who understood power dynamics and public relations, but also smaller in stature, more petty, more human than the legend. He loved his mother with genuine devotion. He cried at Italian operas. He tipped generously and killed without hesitation. He built schools and orphanages with one hand and ordered executions with the other. He died not in a hail of bullets like the movies promise, not in a dramatic shootout or final confrontation, but in a bed, confused and incontinent, calling for people who were already gone, destroyed by a disease he probably caught in a moment of careless pleasure decades earlier. Alcatraz closed in 1963, too expensive to maintain. The salt air corroding the infrastructure faster than budgets could repair it, slowly crumbling into the bay like all empires eventually do. Tourists visit now by the thousands, taking ferries from San Francisco, walking through Cell Block D where the worst inmates lived, standing in the tiny rooms where men like Capone withered and broke. They take photos with phones, buy postcards in the gift shop, imagine the cold and the silence and the isolation. But they don't feel it, not really, because they leave after an hour and return to the mainland and their comfortable lives. The rock keeps its secrets, holds the memories of men who never left. Capone's cell, number 181, is empty now, just steel bars and concrete walls and echoes of footsteps long silent. Tour guides tell the story, simplified and sanitized for general audiences. The scarred gangster brought low by American justice. It's easier than the messy truth. The truth is complicated, refuses to fit into neat moral categories. A man built an empire on the country's deepest hypocrisy, selling what everyone wanted, but the law forbade, what politicians drank in private while condemning in public. The government couldn't stop him with laws against murder, because witnesses disappeared and juries got bought and evidence vanished. So they used laws against math, against unreported income, against the one thing criminals always forget: paper trails. And in the end, neither bullets nor bars destroyed him. A microscopic spiral-shaped bacterium did, a sexually transmitted infection caught in youth and ignored, eating his brain one neuron at a time, reducing the King of Chicago to a babbling child who couldn't recognize his own wife, who thought dead friends were still alive, who played the same 3 chords on a banjo because that was all his ruined mind could remember. There's no clean moral here, no lesson that fits neatly into a motivational quote or a history test, just the arc of a life, rising fast on violence and opportunity, falling slow through legal machinery and biological decay, ending not with the bang of gunfire, but with confusion and incontinence and a widow's quiet grief. If you want to see more reconstructions of history's most infamous figures, the moments that defined them and destroyed them, hit subscribe. We're rebuilding the past with AI, one story at a time, showing you what the history books leave out. Somewhere in Miami, in a mansion slowly decaying under Florida sun and humidity, the banjo he played in Alcatraz still sits in a corner of a storage room, strings rusted and broken, covered in dust. No one plays it anymore. No one remembers the tune. The man who owned it is buried in Mount Carmel Cemetery in Illinois, next to his father and brother, under a simple stone that says only his name and dates. No epitaph, no final words, just silence. The same silence that filled his last years, the same silence that fills Alcatraz now, the same silence that waits for all empires built on sand and blood. The tourists don't hear it. They're too busy taking photos. But if you stand in cell 181 on a foggy morning when the tours haven't started, you can almost hear it. The echo of a man who had everything and lost it all, not to enemies or the government or time, but to something invisible living in his blood, patient as death itself, waiting for the moment to strike. That's the story they don't tell in the movies. That's the truth behind the legend. And now you know it too.